Vladimir Putin has just publicly ridiculed Prime Minister Keir Starmer during an emergency United Nations Security Council session on nuclear treaties. The Russian president stunned the chamber by displaying what he claimed were classified NATO documents that directly contradicted Britain's official position. Within minutes, Allied ambassadors began physically distancing themselves from the UK delegation. And what happened next exposed fatal weaknesses in Western unity, weaknesses that could collapse the entire alliance system. If you want to understand how Britain's international standing disintegrated in a single afternoon, hit that subscribe button now. Because this diplomatic catastrophe is still unfolding. Here's what sparked this unprecedented humiliation. 3 days ago, the Prime Minister delivered what Downing Street called a robust defense of international norms at NATO headquarters in Brussels. Starmer condemned Russia's deployment of tactical nuclear weapons near the Polish border, calling it a flagrant violation of the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Britain, he declared, stood firmly with NATO allies, but the Kremlin had other plans. At precisely 14:23 GMT yesterday, Putin called for an emergency UN Security Council meeting, claiming to have urgent evidence of Western duplicity. Veterans of the Council described it as the most aggressive Russian diplomatic move since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Putin began his presentation at 9:47 a.m. New York time, in fluent English, without a translator. He accused the British Prime Minister of deliberately misrepresenting facts on nuclear treaties, while secretly negotiating side deals that undermined NATO itself. Then came the bombshell. Putin displayed what appeared to be authentic British diplomatic cables, dated just 18 days earlier. They showed officials discussing a plan for Britain and select allies to pursue bilateral security arrangements if NATO consensus proved unattainable. The room fell silent. Cameras caught Britain's UN ambassador Barbara Woodward, pale and visibly shaken, frantically messaging London. The American ambassador subtly shifted her chair away from the British delegation, a moment body language experts later called instinctive diplomatic distancing. Within half an hour, 5 NATO ambassadors had demanded clarification from London. The fallout spread instantly. Macron refused to answer questions about Britain's credibility. Scholz cancelled a scheduled call with Starmer. By 3:15 a.m. London time, the Prime Minister was rushed into an emergency Cobra meeting, arriving ashen-faced, still wearing his watch on the wrong wrist. "This is catastrophic," he reportedly told aides. Inside the meeting, Foreign Secretary David Lammy appeared physically ill. "These documents look real," he whispered. "But they've been twisted." Classic Russian disinformation. Defense Secretary John Healey shouted, "How did they even get these papers?" Intelligence officials had no answers. Outside government walls, military veterans watched in disbelief. Colonel James Harrington Rhett, a former Royal Artillery officer who once faced Soviet forces in West Germany, said, "We stood guard for decades, ready to die defending Europe. Now Putin mocks us while our leaders look like school children caught cheating on an exam." Margaret Blackwood, widow of a NATO veteran, clutched her husband's medals and said, "He believed in NATO with his whole heart. He'd be devastated to see Britain humiliated like this." Meanwhile, Russian oligarchs still enjoy London's luxuries. 62 million mansions in Belgravia, yachts docking in British territories, and their children in elite schools. The hypocrisy, critics say, is morally indefensible. Even former NATO commander Sir Richard Shirreff weighed in, calling it diplomatic schizophrenia. He said, "We can't rely on collective defense while secretly cutting side deals." Putin just exposed the contradiction at the heart of British strategy. But then, something truly unprecedented happened. King Charles III intervened, breaking royal protocol in a way unseen since World War II. During a reception for Commonwealth military attachés at St. James's Palace, the king declared, "Britain's commitment to collective security must be absolute and unwavering. When we allow expediency to compromise our alliances, we repeat the tragedies my parents' generation endured." Sources say the king personally inserted those lines, against government advice. It was a direct rebuke of the government's handling of the crisis. The markets reacted instantly. The pound plummeted to its lowest level since the 2022 mini-budget crisis. Defense stocks in Russia and China soared. In Westminster, chaos erupted. 27 Conservative MPs demanded answers. Boris Johnson tweeted, "Putin laughing, allies abandoning us, national humiliation under Labour." NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte called for transparency and unity. The White House announced a review of alliance communications. On social media, hashtags like NATO crisis and Putin outsmarts UK dominated for 19 hours. Clips of Putin's speech hit 47 million views in a single day. Analysts called it NATO's worst internal crisis since France left the alliance command in 1966. Inside number 10. Panic ruled. Ministers refused interviews. The National Security Advisor reportedly threatened to resign, calling the government's handling fundamentally incompetent. Foreign Office staff whispered, "This government is imploding." Leaked defense assessments now suggest something far darker. Military planners believe Putin's diplomatic strike was a prelude to real military action, possibly near the Suwałki Gap between Poland and the Baltics. If that's true, Britain could find itself diplomatically isolated, exactly when unity is most critical. NATO would be distracted, divided, and paralyzed. Meanwhile, opposition leader Rishi Sunak has seized the moment, projecting calm, strength, and credibility. "The nation needs leadership that earns respect from allies and adversaries alike," he declared. Polls show the Conservatives surging from 34% to 43% in just 36 hours. Public confidence in Britain as a global power has hit its lowest level since records began. The next 72 hours will decide everything. Putin is set to address the Russian Federal Assembly tomorrow. NATO ambassadors are meeting without Britain, an unprecedented exclusion of a founding member. The question now is simple and terrifying. Is this the beginning of NATO's unraveling? Did the Prime Minister just stumble into a Russian trap, one that could end not just his career, but the Western alliance itself? Or has Putin overplayed his hand? Will this crisis destroy NATO or make it stronger? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if this story shocked you, share it, because the mainstream media won't tell you the full truth. We will. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, we'll bring exclusive analysis from former NATO commanders on whether the alliance can survive this historic crisis of confidence.